This is the Financially Simple Podcast, a show dedicated to destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner. And now, here's your host, pizza-loving, certified financial planner, Justin Goodbread.
Welcome to Financially Simple. This is a finance show for small business owners about money, how it works in our business and our personal lives, and how we can build wealth to be financially independent. I'm your host, Justin Goodbread, and today is episode number 29. Today's episode is titled, The Ways You'll Be Paid for Selling Your Business. You know, I remember every one of my business sales, and I've sold 3 to date. 2 of them were cash deals. Actually, one was a cash deal. The other one was through litigation that we had to deal with. And the third one was actually an earnout. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And I can remember as we were going through the negotiations, we were dealing with the details of the purchase agreement. I was always concerned how I would get paid. Of course, I mean, that's top of mind. We're trying to sell our business and get a check somehow. So today what I want to do is walk us through the various ways that we could potentially get paid for selling our business. And there's really not a right or wrong way. And it's hard to really define exactly which way you're going to go through until you get to this point. And your team will help you and guide you depending on market conditions at that point. So I want to walk you through the various ways you can get paid when you sell your business. The first one is what we all expect. Whenever we first start off into business, you know, maybe you're building it to sell like I am, and you're thinking, you know, I'm going to grow this company, build, and one day I'm going to sell it. I'm going to get a nice big, you know, like one of those checks you see whenever you like win the sweepstakes or the big lottery. It's like the 4-foot-long cardboard checks. I'm going to get a big check, and I just can't wait to have my picture made with it. I might even get one of those bumper plates like sold a business on my new Dodge Viper, which, by the way, is not right there with pizza, but I've always wanted a Dodge Viper. Don't ask me why. I just think they're really cool. That's the idea. Many times we think, man, I'm going to get a big check. And cash is king. And if you have the ability to sell your business for a check, for cash, it's always good. If you're offered cash, you may just want to take it and walk away. It's the easiest and the less risky out of all the methods of being funded through the business sale. The problem is that many times buyers will work to try not to outsource as much cash. So they've come up with many different great creative ways on how they could potentially fund a business. So cash is number one. Cash is king. I like it. All of us love cash. I sold one of my business on a cash basis. It was outstanding. I like that one. The second method we use to sell our business is in the form of stock. Now there's 2 types, and I have to deal with both types here, but there's 2 types of methods for stock. The first one is what's called an employee stock option plan, commonly referred to as an ESOP. Now, ESOP plans are very complicated, but they have a lot of advantages. The advantage is it's a way the owner can remain in the company while cashing out or taking the capital out of the company. So it's a great way where if you don't want to retire in the immediate future, you can use an ESOP, stay running the organization until you're fully paid for or until you've fully funded out or sold out all of your stock shares. Then you can move off to the sunset. Another good thing about it is it's really good for benefiting or rewarding good long-term employees, and it creates a long-term initiative and loyal program for employees' hard work. So maybe you've never heard of an ESOP plan before. Here's kind of a very simplistic explanation to what an ESOP is, and this is just meant to be very, very like 50,000-foot view overview. Maybe in a future episode we'll dig down into the nitty-gritty. Basically, a company sets up an independent trust, so therefore the ESOP, that buys the owner's stock at a set price by here's where the catch many people don't like, an independent evaluator. So we may say, hey, I think my stock in my company is worth $10 a share. The independent evaluator says, nope, buddy, it's only worth $5 a share. So for the ESOP to work, you have to have an independent evaluator, someone who values your company's stock that you can't persuade. And you set up a trust, and the trust buys your shares from you based on the purchase price of that independent evaluator. The trust then holds the stock for the employees as long as they work for the company. And when an employee leaves or retires, he can sell the stock back to the company at a fair market value. That's the general sense of how an ESOP works. Now, some entrepreneurs, as I mentioned, don't like having a third party evaluate the shares. and they may feel like that valuation is lower than what the open market would be. Another disadvantage is the company has to have cash. It has to keep a fair amount of cash on hand, and there's rules around that so that when an employee leaves or when a worker leaves, that you have to be able to divert the cash to cash and pay that particular party out. So that's an ESOP plan. And many times they're used in a place, like I mentioned before, to where if you're a business owner and you say, look, I've got, another 10 years or so before I want to go into retirement, you could use an ESOP for a period of time. The second method in stock is when the buying company either provides you stock in your particular company or in the buying institution. So let's say you have company A who's bought out your company B, and they want to merge the two together. They may give you some stock in company A. Or they may say, you know what, we're going to keep every company separate and we're going to let you maintain some of the stock you have in your current company. Now, there's many concerns with this as well. So here's a couple that I was able to come up with and I was able to research out. You've got to make sure that you're not going to put yourself in a position where your shares could be diluted. Let's say the company were to issue additional shares and all of a sudden your value of your shares drop in value. You have to have the ability to purchase additional shares at the same terms of everyone else. So if you're selling a company and you're getting value in the form of stock, you want to make sure that if the buyers rise the price of the company, they do great, and all of a sudden they're making more money, that you have the right to buy additional shares at the same price. You're not penalized as part of your buyout. Now you have, and these are two industry terms, where you have tag-along rights or drag-along rights. So this is when a shareholders or other shareholders, presumably the majority, make a deal to sell the shares or their shares. So a buyer comes in, they give you some shares, and now the buyers who own the majority say, hey, we want to sell our shares. Can you cut yourself into the deal? In other words, if they were to buy your shares at $10 a share, that's your current value, and they found a buyer for $20 a share, can you go in and cut yourself into the deal, which is a tag-along right, trying to get that new $20 a share price? Or are you forced to sell your shares? You may say, look, I know you got it at $20 a share, but I still think this company's worth $40 a share. I'm not willing to sell it right now. Well, if you're forced, then that means it's a drag-along right. So you have to look at your particular company and decide which method may or may not work for you. The other concern you have when you're getting company stock as part of the buyout is you need to see if you have piggyback rights. Now think about a piggyback is, typically at our family reunions, one of the grown-ups will grab one of the little kids, throw them on their back and run around like a piggyback ride, right? Same exact scenario. It basically gives you the right to have your sales registered should the company go public. So next option we have in the buyout is what's called an earnout. Now this is a fun one. I first heard of this from an investment banker when I was in a class. This is a California investment banker who's already agreed to come on the show. I can't wait to have him. This guy's a firecracker. I love him to death. But I met him some years ago, and he was talking about, we were running hypotheticals, and he said, man, I just entered an earnout in this. And I went, what's an earnout? And I remember him walking me through it. I'm like, man, that could be good or bad. So earnout, and I went to Investopedia, believe it or not, and I found this particular definition, and I thought it was great. And I'll put a link in the show notes. Investopedia, the particular author said, an earnout is a contractual provision stating that the seller of the business is to obtain additional compensation in the future if the business achieves certain financial goals, which is usually stated as a percentage of gross sales or earnings. So I thought that was an outstanding definition. So here's the example I came up with. So let's say a company, we'll call it Acme Company. Thinking of Bugs Bunny here, right? So Acme Company has $5 million in sales and $500,000 in earnings. The potential buyers want to pay $2.5 million, but the owner believes that's too low. He's like, no, I don't think so. I think the growth of the company, I really believe this company's worth $5 million. So for the two parties to kind of come to an agreement, they enter into an earnout. It's a compromise, if you will. So they go in and the buyer says, okay, if you believe that's the case, here's what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to still pay you $2.5 million up front. So there's your upfront deposit. And I'll give you the additional $2.5 million if the company reaches, I'm going to give you an example, $10 million in sales over the next 3 years. But if it doesn't hit $10 million in sales, let's say it only hits $7 million in sales, then I'll give you $1 million extra. And so what the buyer is doing is they're giving some credence, or they're giving some initiative, if you will, to the seller to say, hey, we believe possibly that you're right, that the company is on a good track record going forward, but we're not willing to put all our money down yet. We'll give you what we think it's worth, and should we all be correct, then we'll come back and pay you some more. So that's the concept of an earnout. If your business does good, later on you make more money. Now, most of the time, the buyer will put a bigger down payment up front. Kind of like I said, they'll give $2.5 million. If you really think it's worth $5 million, then it's got to hit this number. And if it is, we'll pay you more. Very seldom do you see a small number up front. Very seldom is the buyer going to come in and say, yeah, we think your business is going to get to $10 million in revenue, and we're only going to pay you $1 million up front. Then we'll save another $4 million for later on. That's typically not how it goes. Typically, it's a fair value up front with almost like a bonus to become later on as the company grows, if it grows. The risk that involves is, could the buyer be sinister? Okay, so what do I mean by that? Are they going to move the company out of your hands? So let's say that you think they can drive the company's revenue up to that $10 million number we use as an example. Are they going to move the company's control out of your hands and put it in the hands of a novice? And now all of a sudden your earnout is contingent upon somebody who you don't know, or somebody who doesn't know your exact company and the exact industry very well to try to drive your bonus. That could be a little disheartening. The buyer could have a sister company. This could have been a strategic buyer, and now they're just going to move the sales away from your company. Maybe it was a consolidation effect. They were trying to buy out the competition, and now they're going to move the sales away from your company to their sister company. The buyer may not be as good at managing the company itself. So in the event of an earnout, you have to kind of protect yourself there. We were talking through our case study with my investment banker friend. He said, Justin, typically if I'm on the seller side, then I want the seller to be able to stay in the company in the same role that he's activating in with the new capital that's funded to the company and everything he needs to meet his goals. He goes, that's the way I typically want to see a seller, which that makes a lot of sense. That way, if you do think your company can grow from $5 million in sales to $10 million in sales over the next 3 years with the capital that this buyer brings in, then you can be handsomely rewarded for that.
You are listening to Financially Simple, destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner.
Another way that we can expect that we may look at is a seller carry note, or some people call it a promissory note, or another term you may hear is owner financing. And this, from a seller's perspective, is my absolute least favorite. Now, from a buyer's perspective, I love this option. But if we're trying to sell our company, I'm not a big fan of this one. Typically, you're going to run into a seller finance on small to mid-sized businesses. And the reason for it is, let's say that we believe our company, again, is worth $5 million. If we're going to get a lump sum, then we can expect a discount of 25 to 30, 35%. So if we think it's worth $5 million, we could discount that down pretty considerably, over $1 million, just to get upfront cash. And many times the sellers aren't willing to take that big of a haircut off the top. So they'll come in and say, okay, we'll issue a promissory note for the difference. Now, in an earnout, we were expecting the company to do better. Here we know what the company's worth, but the buyer's just not willing to come up with the cash for one reason or the other. Many times they're legit reasons, but they're not willing to come up with the cash, and they're saying, hey, we'll give you only a certain amount of dollars here, and we're going to expect that you're going to carry some of the risk with us. So again, this is my least favorite. But I went to bizbuy.com. It's one of the larger business transitioning companies out there. They have some market share. They have M&A services and business brokerage services. And I found some interesting points, and I'll put this in the show notes as well, from bizbuy.com. And they said typically whenever you're dealing with seller carry financing programs, we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to look at the seasoning of the particular company. And that is, how well or how strong is the company? How is it projected to be over the near future? If we're going through a trend style company, perhaps it was ink printers. I can remember the Kodak story where Kodak had to drastically change around their particular company, move it from, the old floppy pictures that used to come out of the camera. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was called. I remember that, and then they had 35 millimeter. Then it all went digital. Now we don't hardly print photos anymore. That was in a company who wasn't seasoned very well. They were going to have some issues going forward. And so the size of the season of the company is going to be one factor in whether or not you should carry a note. If you know the company's short-lived. In fact, just yesterday, we had a prospective client call us, and they said, hey, we'd like to hire you to help us buy a company. And we always give a complimentary consultation. So I spent about 15 minutes looking at the data they compiled for us. The prospective client filled out our intake form. I looked at the company, and it just didn't seem right. And I said, well, based on this, I think the company's worth roughly this. Do you have a valuation on it? No, we don't have a value. The owner wants to sell. They want to sell it quick. Why? Then I got to find out what the type of company it is. And this company is not going to be much longer. I mean, it's going to be hammered by the digital markets. And my instruction to this buyer was, and they were 20-year-olds, I said, I'm not sure I would buy this particular company because it's not seasoned enough. So you have to look at those considerations if you're going to do a seller carry. And obviously you, the seller, would know that. Now, the type of business comes into play as well. For example, I have a client who operates a car garage. He's a buyer. He bought a car garage with engines and tires and brakes and the various things all at one time. So he bought this on a seller carry because a type of business is one that's going to be around. In fact, he's making more money now in his second year business than the seller ever did. So the type of business matters. The assets. Now, this is where what happens for collateralization? What can you use as collateral? So go back to my car garage. Should my buyer not pay the seller his note that's due every month, the seller has provisions in the contract that he can just step right back into the company and take it over, and the buyer's lost all of his cash. So that was a risk because the assets are the lifts. The asset is the building. The asset is the equipment. The assets are the customer base. So there's some collateral there. Another one you look at is who's the buyer? Are they broke? Can they actually pay you? Do they know how to run a business? That's a major when you're starting to deal with seller financing. If you find yourself in this area, then you need to be aware of some things. If you actually end up having to finance the business yourself, you might want to put a cap on the salary, the dividends, or the bonuses of the buyer. Think about it. I sell you a business, and all of a sudden, I go in and I start giving myself high wages above the market norms. I pay myself dividends. I start moving monies around. And before you know it, I've sucked all the cash out of the company in a very short time, and there's nothing left to pay you. You may want to put some caps, if you will, on the salaries. You may also want to prevent the buyer from racking up additional debt. Now, obviously, there's going to be some things that the buyer may have to buy, but you may want to prevent the buyer from racking up additional debt and leaving you holding the bill. And then you really have to take a hard look at what collateral is there if the buyer does not pay. How will you be able to come back in and make sure you're taken care of in that particular situation? Go back to my client who bought, I was on the buyer side, who bought the auto garage. Well, that seller really has nothing to worry about. If the buyer misses one payment, okay, the seller can work with him. If the buyer misses two payments, that seller's going to be in that garage going, dude, what's up? I want to see the numbers. Give me some data points here. He's going to want to know what's going on. So it depends on the asset. Now, again, that's probably my least favorite is a seller carry if I'm the seller. Now, if I'm the buyer, yeah, I love a seller carry. Now, let's go to the fifth one. This is the last one. But the buyer may offer you employment as part of the buyout. And I've seen this work really well, and I've seen it work very poorly. I have one client who purchased a business, and he wanted the seller to stay on for a certain period of time. In fact, it was a 24-month period of time, and it worked out brilliantly. The seller knew exactly what they were required, and they basically were going to tutor this young buyer in the style of the business and how to operate the business. And it was a 24-month commitment. So it was all predefined. Everything was clear, specific written instructions. Everything's outlined, and it worked brilliantly. In fact, by like the 22nd month, the buyer let the seller go. It's like, hey, we don't need you anymore. Just go on. We'll finish out the employment contract. But I've also seen sellers stay and get frustrated. And usually this happens. There's an age issue there. Sometimes there's a personality issue sometimes. But usually what happens is we go to sell our baby, right? I mean, these businesses are blood, sweat, and tears. We go to sell it, and the young whippersnapper comes in and they start making all sorts of changes. And we're like, hey, we never did it that way before. And we start getting our team that we've been working with for 15, 20 years, they get disgruntled. Oh, this young whippersnapper, they're changing everything, right? And before you know it, there's a little bit of angst, animosity between the seller and now the buyer. So I've seen the employment card where the buyer offers the seller an employment contract. I've seen it work good and bad. So if it's you, what happens if you're the seller and the buyer says, hey, we want to offer you an employment contract? What are some things you can look for? One of the things I would require if it were me is I don't have to report to anybody else except for the buyer. If I'm not the president or CEO of the company still, and the buyer wants to become the president or CEO, they can't put a middleman in between me and them. I don't want somebody else dictating to me things. That's my personal preference. Another thing you want to make sure of is make sure you spell out your specific role, your job description, even the location of where you're going to work. Lay it all out. The last thing you want to do is go from being the CEO, the president of your company, to now cleaning the toilets. And there's nothing wrong with cleaning toilets. But my goodness, I don't think I would find satisfaction for a period of time just to meet out an employment contract. Or you don't want them moving you. For me, moving me to New York City would be like, just go ahead and shoot me. Now, maybe somewhere like Kansas or Iowa or the Ozarks, away from people, I could enjoy that. But you want to spell out your specific role. What exactly are you going to be doing and where are you going to be doing it at? And you want to nail down the what ifs. What if you just get fed up and leave? What happens then? Is there a clawback provision where you had to pay them back some money, or are you just going to give up your unearned compensation? What if the buyer gets tired of you? Like my client did. It was a good relationship they had for a 2-year period of time. And at the 22nd month, they said, man, we don't need you. Go and enjoy your vacation. What happens in that scenario? So you want to have all that outlined. And you want to make sure that your salary, whatever the compensation is as part of this buyout, is detailed. You want to know what can be cut or what can be terminated. For example, if you have health insurance as part of your package, as part of your buyout for this employment agreement, what happens if health insurance costs go through the roof? Are you going to require the buyers to continue your health insurance? What happens if you have fringe benefits, like a company truck, for example? They're going to give you a company truck and all of a sudden you go through a hard time, they downsize, are you going to lose that? So you want to look at, if you're going into this employment area, you want to make sure you understand exactly all the various things that can be dealt with. You and your attorney will help you in this particular area. So those are 5 different areas where you can end up seeing come your way when it comes to sell the business. So just as a recap, you could get cash, which is awesome. They can give you stock. One could be of your choosing using an ESOP. One could be of yours and the buyer's choosing using either your company stock or the buyer's stock. Another one could be an earnout. I've seen some good things there. Another one could be a promissory note. Not a big fan of that one if I'm the seller, but I'm a fan of it if I'm a buyer. And last of all, they could offer you an employment agreement or a combination of all 5 of those. You just never know. Every business is different. So guys, that's it for this episode number 29. Hey, look, I'm getting lots of questions right now from people who are listening to these shows. And I had somebody say, hey, Justin, you never talk about how we can connect with you. So folks, you can Google me. I am on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. We have an email, justin@financiallysimple.com. You can go to the blog, Financially Simple. You can find me on the YouTube channel. You can find me very easily. You can call the office. If you have a question or comment, concern, leave it in the show notes below. And I'll certainly do my best to answer it. We're working on our next series here on probably how-to series. How to set up an ESOP, for example. But until then, guys, like I always say, life is hard, life is fun, life is complicated. Money does not have to be. Let's continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Y'all go out and create a great day.
You have been listening to the Financially Simple podcast. The information in this show is for informational purposes only. This show is not investment advice. Instead, seek help from a competent financial advisor. Justin Goodbread, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Heritage Investors, a registered investment advisor.